Okay, we are in Duties of the Heart. Here we go. If you're using this edition, either in the full-size edition or the cute edition, we're on page 822, 823 in the second volume. And Kaylin has put up her cat, which that cat is so creepy. Okay. Sorry, just sorry. Okay. And let me put the thing in the chat. So for those people who want that. Uh yeah, I got it right here. Okay, so I'm gonna put the link in the chat. Okay, beautiful. Okay, so we're talking about abstinence. I think um, I've been going back and forth with translations for this word of prishut, which really means separation. But really, what he's talking about is kind of like is more like self-control. I think that that's kind of a better way of looking at it. And we've talked about self-control of the eyes and self-control of the tongue. He started out with tongue and said that tongue is the most important thing, right? And that that the tongue is the most important thing. And now we're all the way up to feet. Now, this image of the path, right? And finding the right path and being directed to the right path is very central, is very central in the Torah, and very central in Jewish literature, right? We're always talking about even the word for Jewish law, halacha, really means the path. That means something which is it means something which upon which you walk, right? Or a kind of way of going. So holech means to walk, right? So ani holech, I walk, and halacha is from the same verb. Um, and all over the place, we talk about, we ask God to show us the derech, right? To show us the path. For you Arabic fans, tariq, derech, tariq, same word. Um, but it's a very big. So the idea of your feet is not just your feet as feet, but your feet as that which directs you on the right path. So he says, next, act similarly with your feet. Okay, so we have to have a good, solid discussion with our feet. And I say that Rabbi Nachman says that one should make a practice of talking to your body parts. Okay, so if your body parts are being difficult, right? If your hands are busy doing things they shouldn't be doing, grabbing stuff that doesn't belong to you, you should have a good conversation with your hand and say, hand, you're a very good hand. You really shouldn't be doing that. It's really not what you're made for. You're made for better things than this. And have a good conversation with your hand. And so we could have a good conversation with our feet also. So act similarly with your feet. Keep them from walking with the wicked who seek excesses. Remember, he's this idea of motarim, of excesses is very important to him, right? There are things that you need and there are things that you don't need. And the things that you don't need, those are what he calls the excesses. So as it says, and now he quotes, he's quoting from Tehillim, from the book of Psalms. Happy is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the company of scoffers. Actually, that's the very first line. Um, yeah, yeah, Walid, good point. Does the person walk their talk? Right? We use that. You're right. We do have that expression, right? Uh, you know, walking the talk. Um, So that's the first line of that's the very first line of Tehillim. The first line of all of the Psalms is happiest man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked. So of course walking is not literal walking, right? It's proceeding, it's acting. Rather hasten to do all good deeds and to the sessions of the wise, uh, as it says, and it quotes from Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, he who seeks out, literally walks with the wise will become wise, that you may walk in the way of the good, right? So this idea of leman telech b'derech tovim, you should walk in the way. So this idea of directing, of getting your feet to move, right? One of the points made by the Hasidic masters is that the angels are referred to as omdim, as those that stand. Whenever it describes angels, it describes them as standing. They stand, right, in the heavenly realms, right? In the heavenly realms, they're always described as standing. It says, but human beings are holchim. They walk, they move, right? So whereas an angel's state never changes, an angel is always exactly the same, right? It doesn't advance. It doesn't advance. It doesn't change. It's an expression of God's will and doesn't go through any kind of transformations. There's no transformational arc in the life of an angel. Human beings, on the other hand, right, are constantly changing. We're constantly moving. We're constantly in a state of transformation. So, so we're the only ones who can telech b'derech tovim, who can actually walk in the way of the good. So Scripture brings together all we have mentioned regarding restraint of the senses, and now he quotes from the prophet Yeshayahu, prophet Isaiah, and it's a beautiful piece. Mi yegur lana ish ochela. He says, "Who among us can live with the consuming fire? Who among us can live with the everlasting blaze?" Now, who's the consuming fire? Who's the everlasting blaze? That's a way of describing God, right? God as this consuming fire, this everlasting blaze, as this kind of fiery, powerful presence, right? How can you live with that? It says, "He who walks in righteousness and speaks honestly, who keeps far from ill-gotten gain, who shakes out his palms lest they hold any bribe, who stops his ears from hearing of bloodshed, who shuts his eyes from looking upon evil." Right? So, really literally mentioning everything that we just talked about, right? He talks about the eyes, he talks about the ears, he talks about the hands, he talks about, right? Um, and starts out with the feet because he talks about walking with righteousness. Now, interesting, by the way, that all of the stuff that's mentioned here is ben adam lechavero, between human beings and human beings, right? You might think, oh, well, who gets to stand before God? Who can stand the blazing fire of God's power? Well, it would certainly be the person who prays a lot, the person who fasts a lot, the person who, right, the person who is in constant remembrance of God, but it doesn't say that, right? It says the person who does righteousness, who speaks honestly, who doesn't take things that don't belong to them, right? Who keeps his hands open so he doesn't take a bribe, who doesn't involve himself in plots of bloodshed, right? And doesn't involve himself in things that are going to cause bloodshed to other people, and doesn't look on evil things, right? So it's really it's not a person who's religious per se who's described like this, but really a person who's good, right? It's the good person, not necessarily the religious person. So the wise one too, okay, so the wise one is always King Solomon, right? So the wise one too brings together all these senses. This is again from the book of Mishlei, the book of Proverbs. It says there are six things that God hates, seven that are abominations to him. Um, so like there are six things God hates and seven which are abominations. Um, Haughty eyes. I'm counting just so you can see. Okay. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked thoughts, feet that are quick to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who incites conflict between brothers. So he actually added, right? Again, all of those things, right? All of those things relate to our relationships with other people, right? All of those relate to relationships with other people. And he's added the heart in there. So they're also found in the psalm that opens. Okay, we have another psalm um, where David HaMelech asks the question. He says, Hashem, mi yagor ba'alecha? Who can dwell in God? Who can dwell in your tent? Right? Who may dwell in your tent? You should know, my brother, right? So the question, and so you'd have to look in at Psalm 15, and then sure it would answer who gets to dwell in God's tent, but you're going to find right the same theme again. So you should know, my brother, sister, friend, that it will be impossible for you to control all the senses while accepting one of them, for they're like a string of pearls. If you release one of them, all of them will be scattered and their unity will be destroyed. So you might think, okay. Listen, I'm gonna control, my tongue is kind of out of control and I can't deal with it, but I'm gonna try not to hear bad things. Okay. I'm just gonna try to, okay. So I'm gonna work on this one, but the mouth, not so much, right? Or, you know, okay, I can deal with not talking and saying bad things, not listening to bad things. But like I like to kind of hang out with whoever I want to hang out with, so my feet are just going to go wherever they want to go. Okay. So I'm not going to worry too much about my feet. I'll just worry about the other. He says that's not possible, right? Because they're all connected to each other. And once one is out of control, they're all out of control. So you kind of have to work on it all together. Therefore, try to be careful about all of them, as each one will help you in all the rest. So, as our sages of blessed memory said, okay, this for our Pirkei Avot folks will remember this verse from Pirkei Avot. For one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah, one commandment leads to another commandment, and one transgression leads to another transgression. So these things are all connected, right? It's not like we can work on one thing and it's not going to have an impact on another. It is. So the wise one spoke, again, the wise one, King Solomon, spoke of the virtues uh, leading successfully one to the other. Happy is the man who listens. This is from Mishlei again, from the book of Proverbs. Happy is the man who listens to me eagerly at my gates every day, waiting for the posts at my doors. Waiting by the posts of my doors. Um, First he said Shomea, okay, listens. Then he said Lishkot, eagerly at my gates, and finally Lishmor, waiting. So so this is a developmental process. It's a developmental process. It doesn't begin all it doesn't it you don't start out. You start out with Shomea, listening, paying attention, simply paying attention. Then you move on to Lishkod. That's being eagerly at my gates. And interesting, by the way, he uses gates because this idea, our limbs, very often in Jewish literature, our limbs, the ways that we relate to the world, right? Our eyes and our ears and our hands, right? These are often referred to as gates, right? Because they're entrance ways, so to speak, right, into us. We're in here, right? We're in here, and these are the ways that we kind of get into we get into ourselves, right? The way that things get into us, those are the gates. So eagerly at the gates, and finally lishmor, waiting. That's something that's a more permanent, right? It means literally waiting, or can also mean guarding. It means you have acquired something and you're holding on to it. So so this is a developmental process, right? It it takes more than one. It takes it develops over time. So now, as to advocating abstinence of the third kind, right? That which relates to what is ours alone regarding our inner selves and our convictions. Okay, so remember we talked about the safun, right? The inner self, the hidden self, and and our and our mind, right? That cat is so bizarre.
I was trying
Uh,
to write with my feathered quill, and they're not allowing me.
I can see that. I can see that. Every time I
So
see them, I'm just sort of shocked. Okay. Um, it's amazing how a little thing like just not having any hair can be so jarring.
fantastic. The best.
And it's not fair. I know it's not fair. It's just my prejudice. Okay. So, um, and he says machshava, right here, which means literally, machshava means literally one's thoughts, but it's not just one's thoughts, it's one's way of thinking, right? It's one way of thinking. So here we have your inner self, your way of thinking. So how do we do this with in relation to our inner self and to our way of thinking, to to the less external sides of ourself? So Um, okay, and our inclinations towards good and bad. Okay, so we have our inner selves, our convictions, or our ways of thinking, and our inclinations, good and bad. The first step in such absence is to detach yourself in your heart and in your thought from worldly acquisitions, except as you need these for sustenance and support. Okay, so the first is to detach yourself. Um, and he says prishuta, a kind of prishut, separation from those things, to not to not identify with those things, right? Which I think in our society makes a lot more sense. I mean, a lot of people understand themselves as being, you know, we are what we own, right? We're identified by the fashions that we wear, by the kind of car we drive, by the computer we use. I mean, or somebody once said to me, um, during my very, very brief um, setup dating period, okay, years ago, um, where I was on these shidduch dates, somebody asked me whether I was an Apple person. And I was like, I had no idea what an Apple person was. Like, it was, are you an Apple person? Turns out I am an Apple person. Okay. I have an iPhone and an Apple computer. And turns out I actually am an Apple person, but I didn't even know that's what I was. Right. But we're identified by the things that we own, by the things, by what kind of place we live in and things like that. And he says we should be separating ourselves from those things, um, and not be worried about all of that stuff, and realize that that's just stuff, right? This is just stuff that's here to help us live, right? It's not my identity. My computer is very useful. I love it. It does also good things for me, but it is not my identity. It is not who I am. Okay? I am not my cell phone. I'm not my computer. I'm not my clothes. And I'm not, even if I wear religious symbols, right? My yarmulke, I'm not my yarmulke. I'm not any of those things. So do not dwell on them for the sake of any physical pleasure, nor to attain comforts or prominence, nor to glory in fleeting material wealth. Okay, so all those things. But I think also, I think I would add to this in our time, personal brand. We have I don't think this. I'm not sure this was a thing in the days of Rabbi Baki ibn Bakuda, but now it is definitely a thing, right? Personal brand, right? People worry about their about their personal brand, right? And right, so we may not see things as being signs of wealth, so much anymore. That seems very crass, right? But as being our part of our personal brand, that we might see. Okay. So I am not an Apple person. So your abstinence should be for the sake of God, may be exalted, not to make a name for yourself, not to aggrandize yourself for doing without pleasures, nor to save money through abstinence. Okay. You shouldn't be abstinent because you're cheap, right? Just because, oh yes, I live this frugal life. Well, I live this frugal life because I'm a cheapskate and I don't want to spend the money on anything. So, I wear tattered clothes and whatever else. That that's not a reason. Or for people to praise you, right? I mean, it's not so much in our society. I don't think our society has a lot of respect for aesthetics, but in a lot of places in the world they do, right? I mean, in India, it's good as an example, right? I mean, if you're an ascetic, you can make a living off of that, right? I mean, that's a yeah, it's a good way to make a living, right? If you have nothing, people start giving you stuff. I don't understand that exactly. The more you show that you don't want anything, people give you more stuff. So, um, it is kind of backwards reasoning, but okay. So, but people respect that. There are definitely places where people respect that. There are these, saints and, in Morocco and in Muslim saints in Morocco and Africa and so on who, do without any kind of pleasures and live. I saw one guy who lived in his own grave. Um, that was a cool one, right? He lived inside of his own grave. He had like a little hut built over his own grave, and that's where he lived, and he spent his whole day, meditating and whatever. I mean, and of course, people, respect that. That's, people came and, you know, but you have to live in a grave to do it, so it's not all that much fun. But okay, don't do it for respect. In this absence, you must not exceed the Torah's limits. For example, by fasting on Shabbat, the festivals, or Rosh Chodesh, by refraining from the duty imposed upon you by the Creator to have children, right? So you can't, you can't fast all the time because there are times when the Torah says you're not allowed to fast. Okay, so you can't do that. So if you want to be fasting all the time, can't do that. Um, if the Torah says you have to have children, okay, so celibacy at least a few times in your life is out of the question, although it's actually more complicated than that because if you're married, right, which obviously you would have to be in order to have children, you do have, if you are a man, you have an obligation, you have sexual obligations to your wife that you are obligated to fulfill. Okay, um, so you know you can't neglect those things. Rather, inwardly and outwardly, your abstinence should be in consonance with the Torah and the religion. So you want to make sure that your abstinence is not overdoing things that you're right. You're not allowed to break the law um, in order to be more super abstinent. The next step is to reduce your worldly aspirations as though you were about to depart this world at the end of the day. Right? If you were, if you knew, right, if you knew that you were going to be dead by the end of the day, chances are like your next move wouldn't be to go to the gym, right? Chances are. Okay. Oh, wait, I'm gonna die in a couple hours. Okay, let me just go to the gym quick, right? That's probably not gonna be a thing, or it's not likely you're gonna go to work, right, on that day, right? You're not gonna say, oh, I'm gonna go. So let me just go get a little bit more work done, right? So if we, so if we imagine, right, if we imagine that we're on a relatively short rope, um, and our expiration date our expiration date is very soon, then there are things and this is obvious. Go to a graveyard and read the gravestones, right? The gravestones never say, you know, spent a lot of time at work, right? Or, you know, what vice president of some such corporation. Like that never ends up on your tombstone. Um, the only weird tombstone I ever saw was uh, my former wife's aunt and uncle who had their bridge scores. They played the card game bridge. They had their bridge scores and rank on their tombstones, which I've never seen that before. Okay. But, even if a person was like a tennis champion or something like that, it's not going to say it on the tombstone, right? It's going to say devoted, devoted husband and father, or it can be, philanthropist or something like that. It's going to be something like that. So we know we know what's important, right? We know what's important, but we get caught up in things which are not so important. So if we consider if we consider um, our our upcoming expiration date completely unknown, then we're going to be careful to pay more attention to the things which are important than the things which are not important. Next, make a personal accounting is explained in the Gate of Self-Accounting. That's another section of the book. So, um, so we're going to keep track, right? We're going to keep track of our service of God and all the different ways, right? All the different ways that we can improve that. And next, give up hope for what is in the hands of men and trust in God. Rely on His providence and judgment, right? Human beings are never going to be able to help you. Now, other human beings are lovely. I love them. Okay. And you should love them too. I mean, they're great. Um, Kalen. Okay. Hope is a salvation fantasy. Um, who says it's a fantasy? Who says? Who says?
Well, James Hillman has that,
James Hillman said that.
yeah,
Okay.
of course, naturally. All right. Well,
Okay.
everybody writes
But
him up.
hoping in human beings is right.
No, it's very necessary. I said it to be time, I mean.
So we have to know sometimes that human beings are untrustworthy. And while we love them, and we should love them, and we should share life with them because we're born for that, right? Born as dependent beings, unlike most animals that just jump out of the egg, right? Ready for business. Okay. We're born completely useless. We're born completely useless and we stay completely useless for a very long time. So clearly we are social animals and we're meant to be in relationship with each other. But ultimately we know that our lives are in the hand of God's providence, of His hashgacha, His His um, his command for the world. Furthermore, you are bound by all the duties of the heart that have been elaborated in this book. They are the pillar of abstinence from this world. Investigate them and hold them close to your heart. Through them, you will attain everything that is good. It's interesting because he ends up saying it's interesting that he goes back to the rest of the book and he said, "Wait a second. Now, I just talked about self-control, right? So self-control depends not just on deciding what it is you don't want, but also on what you do want, and that's what the rest of the book is about, right? So the rest of the book is about what you do want, right? And so avoiding what you don't want, right, which is what abstinence is, avoiding what you don't want depends on knowing what you do want, and that's what the rest of this book is about. So, um, it can't be achieved, right? So it can't be achieved on its own because You have to because you have to know what it is that you do want in order to separate yourself from what you don't want, if that makes sense. I think it does. Okay. So the following now he does something I which is unusual for him. He goes on a scriptural jag. Um, and he has collected together a bunch of Jewish scriptures which support everything that he said so far about abstinence. So I'll share some of these with you. So we started late. I'll go a little bit longer if that's okay with you guys. Okay, so the following is an exposition of what is mentioned in the Holy Scriptures and the words of our masters of blessed memory on the subject of abstinence. He always does that. He goes from the Scripture to the oral Torah, to Talmud and Midrashim and so forth. Um, okay, hold on one second. Okay. Okay. So it says Yaakov said, this is from Bereshit, from Genesis, if God if God will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear. So what does Yaakov ask for from God? Yeah, bread to eat, clothing to wear, simple living, high thinking. Right? He asked only for the basics. Moshe, our master, fasted for 40 days and nights 3 times. Eliyahu fasted 40 days and says on the strength of that meal he walks 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, so we see that Moshe and Eliyahu, um, um, who is very often related for the character of Khidr. uh, in the Quran. A lot of people say to identify them as the same person. It is said of the Nazir is a person who chooses to abstain from wine, um, and not to cut his hair, sort of ascetic type person, that God calls him holy. As it says, throughout his separation, he is to be holy to God, solely because he refrains from partaking of the fruit of the grapevine and lets the hair of his head grow long. How much greater will it be the reward and recompense for one whose desire for all worldly pleasures has ceased? Right? If you're called holy just because you give up wine and you let your hair grow, right? Then how much more holy would you be if you really separated yourself inside and out from worldly things? It was said of Aaron, said of Aaron, the brother of Moshe, drink no wine or strong drink, you and your sons after you, that you distinguish between the sacred and the common, that you teach the children of Israel. Cautions anyone engaged in the act of God's service that he not involve himself in anything that may keep him from completing that service to perfection. As our master's blessed memory said, so this is now from the Talmud, said, if one drinks a fourth of a log of wine, a log is a cheekful, he should not render a legal decision. If he drank fifth, he should not pray, right? So that taking any kind of that if a person takes intoxicants, right? If you take an intoxicant, then you shouldn't be rendering judgment. You shouldn't be praying. You should and the priest, if a priest had taken any kind of alcohol, couldn't serve in the temple. Okay, so while Jews are permitted to drink alcohol, it's not permitted to become drunk. And if you do become drunk, it's not permitted. You can't pray and so forth. So why would you go and do that? And there's a very interesting note here, which I should look at, but we'll see. Okay. In the account of the descendants of this will be my last one because we're late. It says, in the account of the descendants of Yonadav ben Rechav, they were bidden by their forefather not to drink wine, not to sow, not to plant vineyards, not to build houses, but to live in tents outside of settled areas. That's from the book of Yirmiyahu. These are ascetic practices, and the Creator praised them for carrying them out. And he said, there will never cease to be a descendant of Yonadab and Rechav serving before me. Right? So all of these are ascetic practices. He's saying that, look, you might have been reading this and thinking, what does this have to do with the Torah? Wait a second. You know, the Torah is all about balance and having a balanced life. And he says, no, 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 no. He says, look, that there are ascetic practices all over the place, right? There's ascetic practice of Moshe, ascetic practice in Yaakov, right? What is he? He asks God for just a little bit of clothing and bread. He doesn't want much. And again, so this idea that there's a pathway of self-denial there's definitely a pathway of self-denial. And interestingly enough, right, he says about the Nazir, just a little bit of self-denial, right? Just saying, I'm not going to drink wine and I'm going to grow my hair long so I don't look so, I'm not, worrying about my haircut. Um, Even that makes you holy. So, so questions, thoughts? Everybody's just overwhelmed. Mind blown. Okay.
Well,
Uh,
and so abstaining though really is it's like it's not like a matter of want, it's just kind of like for spiritual actualization of sorts. So it sounds like, it's not because you might want to do those things. It's not like abstaining mm, isn't also no desire. I feel like
right.
abstention
I
would
listen, right. Obviously, right. Getting yourself to a point of absolutely having no desire for anything would be very difficult. I don't know that anybody, I don't know who gets there. I don't, maybe some people do. Maybe some people do. But yes. So in many cases, it's kind of like saying, okay, no, this is for my spiritual benefit. And also part of it, listen, part of it is like I saw um, yeah, I was watching a video on planting um, native plants. Okay, planting native plants. I'm interested in planting native plants, even though I don't have a garden. But if I had a garden, I would plant native plants. And the and this guy, he takes this, it's a kind of some sort of like native sage kind of thing. And he says, okay, well, I'm going to graft a bunch of these. And so he takes a big branch of this stuff and he starts cutting into pieces and then he strips it. And until you get these twigs, right? And he dips the twigs into some kind of little powder stuff and plunks it in the ground. And he said, I said, the reason why I strip it is because I want it to focus its energies, right? I want the plant to focus its energies on growing roots, not on keeping these branches growing, okay? Not on the flowers, not on the leaves, only on the, so it gets rid of everything else, right? Which of course, partially white trees, right? Let's get rid of their leaves, right? During the winter. But so they're going to focus on the roots and they're not going to waste any energy on anything else. So I think to a large extent, that's what this is, right? Is that by by not kind of obsessing about these outer things and about all this other stuff, we're able to focus our energies on growing our roots, right? We're able to focus on connection and not worry so much about these other things. So I got a heart for that.
it's beautiful though, and I also like how the heart floats up. That's
It does. It's beautiful. Yeah, I like the floating heart. Okay, guys, thank you so much. Have a beautiful day. And Bezrat Hashem, I'll be back on Monday with with Tehillim and then Pirkei Avot and then to these the heart and only good things. So you should have a beautiful weekend. Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, and be happy. Bye.
thank you
May
so
our
much.
Creator be
Congrats
with you.
on going to the
Amen.
dentist. You did
Bye.
it. Bye.